Welcome, and I'm so glad you tuned in to this episode of Navigate. My name is Tim Austin, and I'm the host and creator of this podcast. And this is the place to come for conversations that inspire and equip us through life's transition seasons. And exploring our callings can be a rich area for discovery and growth when we find ourselves navigating a season of change. And as a coach, I love exploring this area with my clients, and I know that you're going to have some great takeaways from today's conversation with my friend, Chris Heinz. Chris Heinz is a life calling coach who helps people live from purpose, passion, and power. His latest project is building the Life Calling Institute, which helps people from various life stages to explore life calling together. He's a certified real-life process facilitator, Gallup certified strengths coach, certified Enneagram practitioner, and certified professional life coach. Chris is the founder of Chris Heinz Company and chief people officer for Energy Cap, Inc. In addition, he's a top-rated learning partner for Penn State, where he leads programs on strengths and employee engagement. Chris is also a speaker and the author of several faith-based books. He lives in central Pennsylvania with his wife, 3 kids, and golden retriever, and he likes to buy books and sometimes reads them. So join Chris and I as we have a conversation about life calling. Chris Heinz, welcome to the podcast. So glad you could be with me today.
Hey, Tim. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm so encouraged that you agreed to come on here and talk about what I think is a very important topic, and I know that you're passionate about it as well. Life calling, and this podcast has been a lot about transition, and we've talked a little bit about life calling and purpose and all of that. But I think it's going to be interesting today to see how these two areas of calling and transition, the interplay between them.
Yeah, I think so too. I think that in times of transition, if you have a sense of calling, it can be a sort of solidifying force. And yet, while in life calling, pursuing that, we're often called into transition. Right. And if you're stable about your calling, the transition's okay. So I think you're right. I think they play really well together.
Yeah. So I want to start by hearing a little bit of your story. I think our listeners will be blessed just to kind of hear a little bit of background of your story related around calling and transition and how that's brought you to the place you are now.
Sure. Yeah. Well, so I'll start with this past fall, 2020. So this was a time of a lot of deeper work for me. I became aware that maybe I was living under some false beliefs, that were limiting me in terms of how I lived my life and the work I did. And so I felt sort of called and ushered into this deeper self-awareness. And I realized, I was living under some false beliefs and seeing myself an incomplete way. And because of that self-awareness work, I just felt sort of swept into this issue of calling. Like, hey, if I was seeing myself this one way or several ways, which were a little bit incomplete, how did that affect my sense of calling, right? And so that took me back to 5 years ago. I was actually at the time the head of marketing for a software company. It was a family business, so I ran the marketing function. I was doing well. I was, succeeding, achieving goals, but I just didn't feel satisfied. I was actually looking toward turning 40. And it just was kind of like, if I'm going to keep doing marketing for the rest of my life, I'm going to feel regret. Right. And so it was this discontentment that kind of led me into this discovery process 5 years ago. And I decided I need to sort of draw a line in the sand and make this stage of my life known. And my dad was my boss. And I just concluded I can't keep doing this anymore. And so I remember I was really nervous. My dad's a loving guy, but I was really nervous. I didn't want to disappoint him. I didn't know what my future was going to hold. But I actually wrote a letter because I wanted to get my thoughts down correctly. And we had breakfast. I sort of shared this letter with him. And I said, I can't keep doing this anymore. I was made for more. I really want to pursue my calling. And I began to share with him what I thought my calling was. And we concluded, there's probably not a way to do this within the company. So let's look for something outside. So I thought I was going to have to leave.
Mm-hmm.
But thankfully, the head of human resources at our company, he let us know he was leaving. And so I was able to slide into that seat because my calling was to help develop people, give them a better sense of themselves, better self-awareness, and so forth. So I felt like this new role was exactly in line with what I wanted to do, where it would feel like not regret anymore, but actually a lot of purpose and passion. And so as I look back now from 5 years ago, I can trace back a lot of intentional steps I took to discover and explore calling, which is really why I'm doing what I am today, which is coaching people, doing human resources, helping people grow through workshops and training programs and so forth, all because I followed that leader of discontentment.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, and you just mentioned you as you reflect back, you took some intentional steps. So we're going to talk about some of those practical, intentional steps that someone could take when it comes to pursuing life purpose and calling, discovery. How do you enter into that discovery process and engage with that? But so far, what I've heard from you is that there is a period of discontent or something disrupts us and catapults us into a transition or leads us on a path of discovery and a process of discovery. And what's cool about your story is that happened and you began to have intentional conversations around that. And lo and behold, God had some things lined up for you that, related to your work, related to your company, that was a good fit for this new thing that he was calling you into. So I love the fact that obviously we say, God sees all that and knows all that, but it's so cool to see how God leads us through these times, and we're not aware of it at first, maybe, but then we realize he's lining things up. He has this, but he wants us to engage with that process for various reasons.
Yeah, Tim, that's a great point you make. It's that, you don't have a calling unless there's a caller. So this great book called The Call by Os Guinness, he makes that point really clear that we have a calling because we have a caller. And so calling is really inherently relational. And it's the context really through which our lives are played out before the Lord. And so you're right, that was deeply comforting because I felt like I was not making this move on my own. I really felt called into it by God himself. And even though it was a little scary and unknown, I really felt like he had my hand, that he was right there with me. And so my job was just to follow faithfully.
Yeah, that's good. There is some confusion, I think, in some circles around calling, depending on what our background, our history is, what we've been brought up to understand about calling or not. Any exposure to this could be very new to our listeners, but what are some other languages or other words that we might use for calling?
Yeah. So the word vocation, we hear that a lot. Maybe as a replacement for calling. We also hear profession, that one's profession is their calling. So those three words I tend to hear kind of interchangeably: vocation, calling, and profession, which kind of gets us into the area of work and jobs and so forth, careers.
Right.
But one misbelief, I think, is that your job equals your calling. I've come to really understand calling is much bigger than a single job. So maybe if you lose your job or you change your job, you may be thinking, I lost my calling. I got fired, so I
Mhm.
got fired from my calling. That's just not the case, right? Our calling is much bigger than our job. And hopefully our job supports our calling, but it isn't contained in our job.
Well, I think that's just a really good area to engage with, this whole area of what is my understanding of calling, because a lot of times so much of our identity is wrapped up in our work and our
Yeah.
job, our profession. And I'm just thinking about, for myself and my wife, we were 20 years living overseas. We were working cross culturally. We were doing a lot of things that caused this over many years doing that gave me a sense of purpose and identity in that context and doing and fulfilling those roles. And yet when I had my own personal disruptors come about and I began to become aware of some shift and some changes, and God invited me into that process of discovery of what could be next for me, I had a lot of struggle with identity
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and what that meant for calling, because I had connected calling to my profession, to my job, to the roles, to the titles, the things that I had done in the past. And so there was kind of a pretty uncomfortable season of stripping some of that away so that I could gain this new broader perspective of what calling is.
That's
And
interesting.
and so expressions, so calling, just I feel like our call can remain the same, because calling, like you said, is based on relationship, but expressions of that call change and shift through our lifetime, or they can. I don't know, how did that play out for you?
Yeah. Well, I think that if I look at my life and work as a whole, I could see this calling to help people grow into more of themselves and to serve
Mhm.
God. I
Yeah.
can see that operating a lot in my personal life and sort of nonprofits I was involved in, but not able to do that at work. Well, not able to do that in my primary role. I was still a company chaplain, actually, alongside of doing marketing. And so you could say that I was involved in the people work at my company. It just wasn't what I was being paid for, right?
Mhm.
So you can see this calling toward working with people, helping them grow in my life and work. I just had shifted it and sort of made it my pay job when I shifted away from marketing into human resources and coaching. So that calling was there, and I was walking it out in a measure. Um, and so I think that's sort of how it works, right? Is we if we can't find a way to live out calling in our paid job, we are going to want to find a way to live that calling out elsewhere. And it depends on what type of life we want to create. Our calling's given to us, but we want to create a life to support it.
Good.
And so that calling was given to me to help people grow. I was for a while okay with doing it on the side, doing it in little ways. But I really hit a point 5 years ago when I said, the life I want to create now to support my calling would include doing this sort of full time, not
Mhm.
just kind of picking here and there.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. The transitions can be really purposeful seasons to engage in life calling and life calling discovery. But transitions are also, as you know, big disruptors.
Mhm.
And I think I would guess that a lot of our listeners who are tuning in have experienced disruptors, are possibly experiencing some big disruptors. I mean, we have this past year with the
Yeah.
pandemic and everything, and lots of forced transitions as well. Um, just a lot of disruptors. And so as I think of my relationship with God, I don't feel like he causes all of these. He's the root cause of all the disruptors in my life. There's a lot of other things happening here, but he does want to engage with me. He wants to relate to me in that disruptive period of my life, in that disruptive season of my life, and make it purposeful and to help me see the purpose behind the disruption. So, and so when we come to scripture, we often, see these big transition moments and disruptors. I think of Moses and the burning bush. So those moments are rare, like those big,
Yeah.
disruptors in our lives, those kinds of awe-inspiring moments of deep revelation. But what are some clues that we should be looking for? Some signs that God may be inviting us into a season of discovery, life calling discovery.
Yeah. Well, like we said earlier, I mean, discontentment, being unfulfilled, dissatisfied,
Mm-hmm.
that can be a really powerful clue that
Yeah.
something's different, something's changing.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't just discount that piece.
Yeah.
But I think that God is always calling us into truth about himself, truth about ourselves. And so when we feel called into greater truth, authenticity, awareness, I think that's often a sign that a transition's coming, that he's preparing us for something different. That certainly happened with me this past fall. I think that happened to me 5 years ago, right? I think you actually see this in the life of Christ, where he was shifting into public ministry, being baptized by John the Baptist. And what happened? God spoke and blessed and said, "This is my son whom I love, and whom I'm well pleased." That was a very significant truth-telling moment, which then really kicked off his public ministry. The first scripture he reads, in a temple is about him anointed, to do all these exploits for the kingdom. That was a moment of truth about who he was. And so you want to pay attention to when God is speaking truth to you in a new way. Maybe you see yourself in a new way, because I think that is a powerful moment when he may be signaling transition coming.
Good.
What I also found was that I wanted deeper awareness about myself. And so this is where I went inward and said, what do I know to be true? Who am I? Why am I here? Where am I going? That helped me hold on to some foundational truths while maybe the ground felt like it was shaking.
Okay. Yeah.
But I was able to hold on to some foundational things, keeping in mind calling is inherently relational. And so I cannot answer who am I without hearing what God says about me. I can't answer why am I here without listening to God on why I'm here. And I can't answer where am I going if God doesn't show me something about where he's taking me. And so it is inherently relational, both vertically with him, but also back inwardly with me. And so transition can actually be a deepening in our relationship with the Lord if we walk it with him.
That's good. Yeah. So what were some tools or resources or exercises that you entered into that were particularly helpful in this area of self-awareness?
Yeah.
And I hear you saying that God speaks into, with his truth into our lives. So moments of discovery with God, but also this other path of self-discovery. What were some things that were particularly helpful for you in that area?
Yeah. Well, passion. I paid attention to, when have I felt really alive?
Yeah.
If I didn't get paid for this, what would I want to do willingly?
Yeah.
When have been my moments of if I could do this forever, I would keep doing it. Those types of moments. So passion, I think, is really important to listen to. I think my abilities, so my strengths, my skills, my knowledge, what am I good at? What resources do I have at my disposal to do work and to sort of perform and succeed? So paying attention to my abilities was important. So I took an assessment like Clifton Strengths or the Strengths Finder assessment that helps identify your top talents. That was good. Assessments like the Enneagram can help you also understand yourself at a deeper level and what you sort of do really well naturally and how you're motivated. So that that tool is really good. So passions, number one, abilities, number two. I also asked myself the question of purpose.
Mm,
Why do I think I'm here?
good.
Why do I think God put me here on the earth? If I wasn't here doing this one thing and the world was missing it, what would that one thing be?
That's good.
So
Yeah.
the question of purpose was really, really important to answer. And what I also did was I looked around and said, what needs have I stepped in to fill that I felt kind of like specially equipped to fill? So it's not just about my own passion, purpose, abilities. It's also about the needs. Like what
Okay.
needs are
Yeah.
around me that have like made themselves known, and how can I step into filling those needs?
That's good. As I hear you talking, I also thought about just the people, the type of people I'm drawn to, that I'm naturally drawn to,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm gifted or passionate about serving or meeting a particular need. So one of the things I like to explore with when I coach with people is who is that, we might call them, who is my audience, who are the people I'm especially drawn to, and I would just love to do more of and work more in that space and serve more in that space. You mentioned purpose and passion, and I think that goes along with values too, like
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
rediscovering or like rediscovering what's important and why. I think that's a huge area of life calling discovery. At least it was for me. I went for a long season, years doing, the mission field. I served in a lot of different capacities and a lot of different roles. So it wasn't like I was always doing the same thing, but but in the, just the broad picture of being a missionary for all those years, that was my, I kind of lost touch with the deeper core values, that I need to either be reminded of, or maybe some of those values had shifted. What was important was beginning to shift, and I needed to engage with that process. So yeah, life, core values and what's important, and asking the why behind that is a key ingredient to life calling discovery. I would say personally from my
Yeah, no, I
my
totally agree with that. And then what I did was make sure that I engaged mentors,
Mhm.
community.
Okay.
I don't think calling is figured out on your own.
Yeah.
We're not meant to figure this out as an island. And often, sometimes God speaks directly into something, but sometimes he speaks through other people's wisdom and discernment as sort of serving as mediators, between you and
Good.
God.
Yeah.
And so I think that community is so important. Family, friends, folks that you're accountable to, that you submit to, mentors, coaches. We really need to be listening to those who know us. Because what I've found is that I have a sense of who I am and what I'm good at, what I'm called to, and so forth. But often other people have seen me in action and they have something to add too. They can speak into it as well. And so I've really looked to others for a sense of confirmation and even deeper awareness. And so we don't want to miss the community piece, in the subject of calling, because it's so important.
That's a great point, Chris. Life calling discovery cannot be done in isolation. Yeah, you
Yeah.
need community, you need connection, you need to engage. And that kind of goes to what was going to be my next question. And I think you've already touched on some of this, but what kind of support structures, and resources do you recommend when it comes to engaging this area of life calling discovery? Because people often, we lack, this is a time of when we lack clarity and direction, and we feel a need for support, but we're not always sure what that looks like.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, authentic relationships, that's
Mm,
critical. So, folks you're going to commit to walk this journey with, let them know, like, I'm in a process of greater discovery. We walk this with me, and be honest and authentic, about it.
mm,
So
mm.
authentic relationships is one of those sort of structures or resources that's critical. I think that Personality assessments, self-assessments can be another really critical tool. Like I said, Clifton Strengths, also called Strengths Finder, is key. The Enneagram is really good. There may be other awareness tools listeners use, but these types of tools can help identify and give language to principles for us to know. Values and needs assessment.
Right.
We've got a great one that you use and I use.
Yes.
That's great too. So assessments are great. I think that one principle that I've tried to uphold in a discovery process, which is sort of a structural thing, don't make big changes or make big decisions right away. I see calling as a series of faithful steps. And we are called to take one step and put one step in front of the other. But I just think that probably commit yourself to a process of wisdom and discernment over time with trusted relationships. Don't make a huge leap, right away. Like, take small, faithful steps one at a time based on what you're learning, and then see where that takes you.
That's really, really good advice, Chris, because I think that we often we can get impatient with the process, right? And we want to move to that next thing. Transition can be uncomfortable, can look messy. And yet it's this rich, fertile ground for discovery and growth. And so what you're saying is so true. One step at a time, see it as a process unfolding rather than one big leap to get to the other side, right?
Yeah, and I think some of that leap comes from a couple of things. One, a lot of us are afraid to miss it. We feel like if we wasted all this time, now we have to leap quickly and leap far in case we miss it. I really see calling as a journey of faithful steps, not a destination of starts and stops. I think it's hard to think we're going to miss it if we keep calling as relational. Then we're not going to miss it because we're in this walk with the Lord and He forgives and He leads us and we grow. But if we look at it as a destination, we're going to fail and miss. That does not feel very relational to me, based on a God of grace and forgiveness and new creation. That feels more law based to me. Then there's a series of spiritual practices which I think are really helpful in this process. Things like prayer, silence and solitude, intentional discernment, storytelling and listening, journaling, kind of listening to your own life and stories, and listening to other people's stories. All of these, what I think of spiritual practices, are vital. If you read the literature down through the ages on calling, these types of practices seem to be really important in discerning God's call, and not just discerning God's call once, but living into God's call for you. So that's to say, we don't just need community and prayer and silence and solitude and discernment. Once we are seeking to discover our call, we really need these practices to keep going at it, to live into our calling. And so I'd recommend all of these practices in some measure.
Good. And again, and I would just reinforce what you just said. Just, we need these practices to live into our calling. That's so good, because it's also transition and life calling discovery. These seasons are a season for equipping ourselves with new tools and life habits and practices that are going to sustain us moving forward. And I think that sometimes we get into these places because we haven't, or we've gotten out of the habit of doing such and such, some life-giving exercise, some life-giving habit, some life-giving way that we're rhythm during our week or days that has helped us sustain. And so what you're saying, I just think it's so true that but it's also a time of just re-engaging, but also equipping ourselves with new tools, kind of surrounding ourselves with new support structures to move forward.
Right.
So good. Okay, Chris. Well, let me, as we wrap up the conversation today, and this has been so good. And I know I want to give you an opportunity to share a little bit about what you're doing and how our listeners can engage with some of the things that you're offering right now. So I want to give you an opportunity to do that. But first, I want to ask you, what advice, okay, I'm going to put you on the spot here. What advice would you give to your 20 or 30 something self, especially when it comes to engaging this area of life calling?
Wow, great question. 20 and 30 something self. Well, what I would say is try things out. Don't worry about getting off track too much. I think that I tend to stick to the road I'm on, and I'm a little afraid of trying things out, see if this works, what this works. One of the things I've read in the literature is the importance of trying and having life experience and testing things out. So I would say to myself, hey, just dabble a little bit, follow the path, veer off the path a little bit, see how you feel about this, see what kind of results you get. So I'd say be a little freer in the path that you're on and invite new experiences. I think I would say that. I think I would also say secondarily, invite more people in to the journey. Don't walk it alone. I think that I kind of walked my journey alone a bit too much. And I think I missed out on some things. So, I'm not saying invite the whole world in, but invite several really authentic relationships in to the journey of life, and, be okay with not having the answers.
It's good. Great words of wisdom as we wrap up our time today. And I want to just give you an opportunity, Chris, to just share how can our listeners engage with what you're doing right now, whether it's in this area of life calling or any other area of support that you offer. How can they find you? How can they connect with you?
Great. Thanks, Tim. Well, this has been a real joy to be with you. Listeners, if you're feeling like you're resonating with what we're talking about here, I'd invite you to go to chrisheinz.com. That's Heinz like the ketchup. So chrisheinz.com/institute. And so what we're launching this year, we're building it up slowly, step by step. It's called the Life Calling Institute. This is a place for people from different life stages to come together to explore the topic of life calling. All right, so we're going to look at these sort of 7 core subject areas of purpose, passion, identity, beliefs, the world's needs, values, and one more that I can't remember, but 7 areas of calling. And we are doing this through 3 deliverables. We're going to do a monthly webinar covering a different topic of calling. We're going to do a monthly community call where we're really engaging and interacting around these topics. And third, we have a private social network where we can interact and engage around these topics as well. It's really exciting to see folks from all different countries come on board, stages of life, to really intentionally explore this Life Calling Institute. And we are coming around this definition of calling as this. Calling is supernatural purpose that brings good to the world, creates personal meaning and joy, and utilizes innate and grown abilities. So that's the core definition that we're operating under. And so if that definition excites you, supernatural purpose, if any of these topics I talked about today with Tim excite you, love you to go to the Institute. It's totally free in 2021. We just want to start helping people and get the word out. And so do sign up if this interests you. chrisheinz.com/institute is where you can sign up and receive any of this value. Like I said, totally free. If you would want to do a little extra around this topic, I do coaching, life calling coaching with folks. I can also coach around strengths and Enneagram as a certified coach around those topics, because self-awareness is really critical in this topic of calling. I love what's happening with people already. Folks are thinking differently, engaging one another, engaging the Lord. It's really exciting. And so again, go to chrisheinz.com/institute. You can see all we have to offer there.
Thanks, Chris. Hey, this has been a great conversation today. We'll have to do it again soon.
Yes.
In the meantime, looking forward to tracking with you and all the things that you're doing to support people in this whole discovery process. So thanks again for joining me today, Chris.
Thanks, Tim. I loved being here. We'll talk again. God bless you. And goodbye, listeners.
Bye, Chris. As Chris reminds us, life calling is a gift formed out of relationship, never in isolation. Our assignment is to create a life to support and steward that calling. Life calling discovery is more often a series of intentional steps rather than one big leap. So what intentional steps could you start taking to explore and discover your personal life calling today? Working with a coach is a great way to start paying attention through disruptive seasons of transition. Learn more by booking a discovery call with me at encompasslifecoaching.com. And if this podcast has been helpful to you, we would really appreciate a review on iTunes to help us with our ratings in the podcast world, which will ultimately help more listeners find us. So glad you tuned in to this episode of Navigate. I've been your host, Tim Austin, helping you navigate change with confidence and clarity, and I'll see you next time.